Hello, greetings to everyone, and thanks to our sister organization, AfroDebt, for inviting us to be part of this very important and timely event, which is the challenges and opportunities on debt towards the next fourth Financing for Development conference in Seville. I would like to start by briefly mentioning what is the current context and situation of debt. What are our main concerns from a Southern perspective? And as we can see, external public debt has increased in the recent years. Every year in the last decade, the world has reached a new peak of debt. And we can see in the orange bars that private bondholders are the main creditors, and then in the blue bars, the multilateral creditors. So the concern is not only about how high is the debt stock, but also what is the composition, because it leads to conflicts in terms of debt restructuring, but also it leads to a higher cost of capital. There is an increasing number of countries that are at risk of debt distress or are already experiencing a debt distress. 130 out of 150 countries are in a debt situation that it is at least slightly critical. And we can see in this chart that only the dark blue bar is the number of countries that have a low risk. That means that the majority of these countries have a certain degree of debt distress. And as I was mentioning before, one of the most concerning problems now is the high cost of capital, higher interest for the global south, that of course lead us to have a higher pressure in our public budgets in terms of prioritizing debt service and undermining the key expenditures that our countries need in health, social protection, and education. Southern countries borrow at rates that are 2 to 4 times higher than the US and 6 to 12 times higher than Germany. We can see in the chart of the left that interest payments on public and publicly guaranteed debt for low and middle income countries during 3 years have increased for all southern regions. And we can see in the right that Germany has access to an interest rate of 0.8%, the US to 2.5%, and we can see in the far right, Africa, with an interest rate of 9.8%. This higher burden of debt service payments in our public budgets have, of course, an important impact. And as we can see here, in the case of Africa, for instance, the debt service burden, which in this case involves external and domestic debt, is 3 times the expenditure on education. It's more than 5 times health expenditures, and it's more than 20 times expenditures on social protection. Why this is happening? There is no system of debt in place. The current tools and initiatives are not capable to prevent a debt crisis, but also they are not capable to provide a timely, independent, transparent, and binding debt resolution. There are existing debt crisis resolution initiatives. We had the London Club, the Paris Club, several initiatives from the IMF, and the current G20 Common Framework that have proven that are not fit for purpose and that fail to deliver long-lasting solutions. So there is an ad hoc approach based on uncoordinated practices that are mainly creditor-led, and the consequences of not having a fair system of debt in place is having a direct impact on human rights, on welfare, and also in the survival of the peoples in the global south. Therefore, the world needs urgently a systemic reform, a reform of the international debt architecture, which is part of the international financial architecture. And this will be This can be given only if we have a change in the governance. A change of the governance means strengthening the multilateralism through the next FfD4 conference, where the decision makers can provide a signal of strengthening the multilateralism through a UN Framework Convention on Sovereign Debt. Debt is a key topic this year, is one of the most important topics in the FfD4 agenda. Therefore, it is the opportunity, but also a challenge to have negotiations between all countries within this process to have an outcome, a successful outcome where debt is being addressed in a responsible and fair manner. So what a UN Convention framework on sovereign debt would entail? It would encompass global consensus on norm setting for the whole debt cycle from the very beginning of the cycle, which is hiring new loans or issuing new sovereign debt, but also through the cycle until a debt restructuring is needed. So among the main policies that could be decided under a fair and under a governance where all countries have a vote and have a position and can have decisions over the debt architecture are the reduce of debt service with debt relief for countries in need and an automatic debt suspension in the face of external shocks. It can also involve a timely, independent, transparent, and binding debt restructuring process, a new comprehensive and holistic debt sustainability analysis, considering total public debt risks, including new debt service ratios, for instance, but also a model that could assess debt sustainability under a human and environmental rights approach. In addition, all debt sustainability projections should be transparent for national stakeholders such as parliamentarians, civil society, academia, and citizens, and all this can be part of the policies that will be decided under the convention. It would also entail responsible borrowing and lending principles, which there is already an important basis under UNCTAD's leadership. It would entail as well national legislations in key jurisdictions to ensure that private creditors are compelled to cooperate in debt restructuring negotiations. It would entail as well establish a public global debt registry, which would increase transparency in the global debt system and ensure that all lenders and borrowing governments are held accountable. But it's also important in terms of prevention to prevent the debt spiral for low and middle income countries through concessional loans that must be a priority in the current crisis, and tackling the high cost of capital for southern countries by reducing interest rates and by implementing non-debt creating mechanism. And here the regulation of credit rating agencies is important in terms of the impact that their assessments, the assessment of a private credit rating agencies have over the cost of capital and therefore the higher burden of debt in our public budgets. As I mentioned, debt is the key topic in the agenda of FfD4, and having a change, a reform, a systemic reform in the governance of debt policies would be really a game changer towards a middle and long-term sustainable debt, therefore a middle and long-term sustainability of life. Thank you very much.